Hi, everyone. Welcome back to chapter 6, where we will be talking about fermentation today. So, fermentation is the creation of cellular energy when oxygen is not present or abundantly available. We have two types of fermentation that we're going to talk about. We have alcoholic fermentation and we have lactic acid fermentation. Both of these do the same thing with different end goals. So, alcoholic fermentation produces an ethanol based product. What happens is glucose goes through glycolysis, where it is still breaking itself down into molecules of pyruvate. But those pyruvate cannot move into the mitochondria because oxygen is not present or abundantly available. But in order to keep glycolysis moving, fermentation takes over. Alcoholic fermentation goes through glycolysis, that goes through the fermentation process. It makes molecules of ethanol and NAD plus, which cycles back to glycolysis to make NADH to keep that cycle running. Lactic acid fermentation happens inside of our muscles, and it produces that same step. Okay, glucose still goes through glycolysis to pyruvate. Pyruvate then gets broken down into molecules of lactate or lactic acid. This is the buildup of a chemical in our muscles that burns when we work out. As soon as oxygen is readily available, that burn starts to go away as cellular respiration takes back over. Fermentation is a way of harvesting energy in the absence or lack of oxygen. It allows glycolysis to continue when oxygen is not readily available, preventing pyruvate from entering the Krebs cycle. Fermentation is responsible for cycling NAD plus back to glycolysis with minimal generation of ATP. So every time that we generate back NAD plus to glycolysis, we can only create 2 ATP. This is considered an anaerobic process because it is not using oxygen, but it still allows our body to store high amounts of oxygen during high energy periods. So these are our types of types of fermentation. We have our lactic acid fermentation. This happens in our muscle cells of most animals when oxygen is scarce or not present. That burning feeling that we get left behind happens in microorganisms as well. These are organisms that don't have access to high levels of oxygen, but still require some energy in order to do their daily jobs. And its end goal is producing lactic acid. Alcoholic fermentation is performed mostly in yeasts. They use alcoholic fermentation to help produce food and drink. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of alcoholic fermentation. This is what allows the dough of bread and pizza to rise. It's also what gives certain drinks carbonation. And its direct production is ethanol. So directly produces some type of an alcohol in foods like breads, pizza doughs. This evaporates off during the cooking process. Other times it is harvested for enjoyment. So in yeasts, a few things happen. It starts with sugar. So sugar provides the glucose, the food source that then feeds the yeast. The yeast break down that sugar and become what we call activated. CO2 is released when fermentation starts, produces that carbon dioxide. It creates those air pockets in bread, but it is given off as a waste product. And then the product is that alcohol produced during the rising of the dough, gets evaporated off during the cooking process. The yeasts then are also killed by the heat, and we're left with some type of bread or a dough. That is fermentation in a nutshell. Check back soon, and we'll be talking about photosynthesis.